Welcome! Today we're going to be looking at a tutorial for rigid bodies, and to make it a little bit more visually appealing, I'm going to link it with this already made scene that I have for my project, Samsara Loop. So, if you want to find out more about this project, just click my channel and everything you need will be on my main page. So, what I'm going to do is add a normal mesh. Let's say we're going to want to use something like a sphere. Sounds nice. We can, of course, define how we want our sphere to look, or what geometry we want it to have, at least nominally. And so we're going to do that right here. And I like the 36:18 ratio. So this is going to be our rigid body. And what we have to remember while working with rigid bodies mostly is that basically what happens is that whenever you move ahead in a scene, once you've added a rigid body, basically it gets lagged and it doesn't work. So we're going to try and avoid that by either not adding a rigid body until we're absolutely sure this is where we want to place the object, or working once we've added the rigid body by always reverting to the 0th or the first frame by clicking this symbol. And there we go. So let's start placing our objects, and what these objects are going to be are placeholders for more complex geometry that we're going to layer on top. I'm thinking of using a metaball system and linking it, and I'm going to get into that later on in the video. So I'm going to place this around here. Of course, I'm going to go into this composition, and the way I'm working with this model is I want basically a stencil, and I'm going to use a lot of motion blur then, because I've already rendered out one version of this, and I'm going to layer it later, and I want it as a stencil, and my resolution here is 1920 by 1920, which means I can of course convert it to both formats if needed, if I just need it in general for any cut, but of course I can always make it smaller and put it anywhere in the background. So I'm going to want to put an odd number of rigid bodies in here, so just for compositional reasons. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to want to link force fields with the geometry, or not with the geometry, with the animation that's going on right here. So I'm going to want to link basically the force fields to the individual objects that are moving here. It's going to be definitely easier to link it to this because it's just rotating, whereas this is moving along a path. That can get really screwy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a force field. And I've added my force field, and now we just have to find it, perhaps make it a little bigger, because this scene is quite large, and I think we're going to need quite a bit of force on this in order to make it pull. So, I don't know, should I put it on the base here, or on the end? Haven't decided yet, but in either case, I'm going to put probably two force fields like this. Could create a very interesting oscillation, and then I'm going to put a negative value in here, something like -20, but realistically let's try -200 because it is a very large scene, as I've said. And to give you a sense of how large of a scene it is, the distance from the camera to the object is about 150 meters, I think. That's right, if I remember it correctly. Let's see how big this is, and yeah, that's about 247 meters. So yeah, and so I'm gonna need quite a bit of force, but at least I'll get a very interesting interaction, and we'll see how taxing it is for the system, because of course making large scenes in Blender is taxing for your computer, but you get a little bit different behavior. At least I think. Of course you could suppose tune it for a smaller version, which I might do if it just doesn't quite work well. So yeah, so I'm gonna parent it to these objects, which means it's going to be spinning along with it. So let's see what the effect of just these two forces are. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add the rigid body, basically. I'm going to add the rigid body physics system to every object. And what I'm going to want to do, I'm going to put different weights, even though they're dynamic. going to put slightly different weights, so I guess that makes some slightly different densities, I suppose. And just add the rigid body here. We always want it on active, and we always want to set the weight if we want it custom, or leave it at 1. It's up to you, really. The higher the weight, the easier it will be to move the object, as we will see, and as I will demonstrate in a little while. And the heavier the object, the harder it is to move, basically. So, yeah, there we have that. Of course, you could save yourself time by setting it up only in one of these objects at the beginning and then just duplicating it, but at least in this way you get to see it repeated several times over. And which means I will have to show you this again. And there's two options you can use here. Either you can use a mesh to get the exact shape and geometry that's being used here, which would be this geometry. So this geometry will then be calculated as your rigid body. Or if you have a generic object like this, yeah, you can use its shape, and it's a default sphere, so this should be perfectly round, which should be hopefully, and in my experience, simpler on the system. And also, because basically it doesn't calculate the geometry, it doesn't have to calculate the geometry, it's just like a universal sphere, I suppose, or I hope there's an optimized model, or at least it seems like it. So we're going to use the sphere, and that's going to work just fine. So now that we've got the sphere on all of these, which means that'll improve their collision, we can animate it, and let's see what happens. So we're getting some movement here, but it's all falling down in our scene. And it's not falling too fast, so that's not too bad, but still, it could cause quite a problem. So we do want it lower now that I think about it, or higher, in order for it not to collide. The same for the force fields. We kind of want it to be dragging above, I suppose. Yeah, let's put it lower. Sounds better, because we don't want it to interact with the mesh, because that would be a lot of rigid body collisions that we'd have to make. We might still have to make some, but we'll see later on. So we've got this, and then basically what we want to do is turn off gravity. And you can turn off gravity here in scene properties, and in scene properties you can turn it off right here by setting it to 0. I'm going to set it to 0.1 negative. I want it to be kind of negatively buoyant. So yeah, I am going to move my force fields, because if I don't move them low, so they're basically parallel, spinning in parallel, they're going to move upwards and collide with the mesh anyway, which they do anyway, as you see. And here we have an example of exactly why lighter objects are, for example, easier to move by forces. And you can see this can cause a problem, so I can correct this by going to 1.2 or 1.3, and that way it should hopefully help, at least a little. It still gets pushed out, that doesn't matter. What I'm going to do here, in order for in order to separate this, is just put a plane right here, center it. I'm going to put it to 0 just by setting it right here. So I'm going to write 0, 0, 0, 8. Okay, looks interesting itself, but let's put it down here just so it can't collide. And then let's give it a shape by subdivision surfaces, or like this. This should be sufficient. I'm even going to leave it like this probably. And now I'm going to add a rigid body. And what you need to do when you want for example, an object to keep other objects contained, or to collide, yet not to have the property of a rigid body and to be thrown around by the forces, is you have to put passive right here. Select type as passive, and then I'm going to put shape as mesh, and I'm just going to put solidify on there, add a little bit of depth hopefully. So this, just so it's easier for the program to read. So yeah, okay, let's try this, and yeah, that looks okay. That's pretty good. And all we have to do now is hide the object like this, and be sure to hide it right here in the render. And before I hide it, I got an idea, and what I could do is link this to a different animation here, or create some sort of animation in order for it to look a little more interesting. Perhaps a rotation in the opposite direction. So I'm going to go rotation, and then I'm going to go all the way back here and switch it like so. I'm going to go R and just turn it. Let me do that again. So like this. It should look interesting. Go rotation. And now let's hide the seed result. And don't forget, you have to put it all the way to the beginning every time. So don't forget to put it the first frame in this case. So let's see what it looks like. That looks pretty interesting. And as you can see, the plane's working just fine, keeping the rigid bodies from colliding with the mesh above. But I'm still not happy with the dynamic of it. I want it to be spinning around more, I suppose. What happened is the sensitivity here is on a margin of 0.4 meters. So I'm going to turn that down to 0. So yeah, let's see if that helps. And the same for the balls as well, but they don't need it because they're on a sphere, I think. They still have a little bit of space between them. That shouldn't bother us too much. So yeah, okay. And as you can see, after the 250th frame, my rigid body stops working. So what I'm going to do is I have to go here into scene properties, the same place we change gravity, and I have to go into rigid body world, I think, and yes, go into cache, and then set the end frame value, which is 278, which I just deleted. That's great. So the end frame value of 278, and put it at the end right here in the cache, and that should do just fine, should do wonders. So, but I'm still not satisfied with it. I think it needs a lot more forces. So, what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to add another force, and I'm going to make it much stronger. So let's put this to minus 1,000. So let's see how that works. So yeah, looks okay. And as you can see, the rigid bodies are basically leaving the frame, and I can prevent this as well. As you can guess, once again, I'm going to use the same technique I used for keeping them from colliding with the mesh on top, and just add a cylinder, and then make it put it like this, make it just squash it down basically, and finally, once we've squashed it down, we can delete the top and bottom face, delete face, delete face, so like this, and then we can add a subdivision, make it nice and smooth. Alright, looks good. And then we're going to add a rigid body, and once again set it to passive, and here we're going to set it to to mesh, because we need a mesh. And once again, don't forget to set the margin if you want it to be exact to 0. Alright, so let's try this, and let's see if it works without solidify. So yeah, oh, and let's make it smaller, of course. Yeah, that looks nice. So yeah, okay, that didn't work because it's not tall enough. So let's just make it universally tall like this, and let's see if this works. Oh, that it didn't like that. Okay, so this is something that can totally happen, and it's when you have you add two rigid bodies into the same scene and are overlapping. What basically happens is your computer goes, or at least Blender goes, hey, I don't like it. So what it's gonna do is it's gonna say, hey, you shouldn't be together, and it's gonna catapult them. So what you need to do is move it out of the way in order for it not to basically explode like that, or shoot off like that. So let's try it now, and let's go H just to see the result. So yeah, perhaps that was overlapping as well. I didn't see that before. Oh, yes it is. So let's put it down here. Maybe let's just make it a little bigger, just in case. Okay, hopefully that'll work. So let's see how that works. Oh, that was overlapping as well. We've got a pretty good rigid body system. I'm pretty satisfied with this, and it's spinning around quite nicely. Of course, we can always play around with stuff like bounciness in the surface response right here. So let's see what's some bounciness will get us for this little ball. So let's see what it looks like when it's bouncy. You can see it should be much more bouncier. And another characteristic we can change here is friction, which is right above bounciness. So that's interesting. The bounciness actually makes it spin faster. Let's see if we lower the friction. It should spin slower and just kind of bounce more and be less cohesive with the edge. So yeah, okay, that looks pretty good. But let's see what happens on in contrast when we put the friction really high. I'm guessing it's going to roll really fast along the edge right now, and as you can see, it is rolling quite quickly, which can be quite interesting once we add basically a asymmetrical metaball. But I'm going to leave that for the next video, so this is where I'm going to cut off this video. Let me know if this helped you in any way, because you want to find out how to create the next part, which is going to be linked in this video.